further ado, I'm going to give it up to Jason, who's going to talk to us about a topic that I find very important. All right, Jason, all yours.
Thank you so much, John Ryan. I'd like to thank you and Victor, as well as the Nat King Cole Generation Hope, for inviting me to join you guys on this conference. I'm really honored to be here. And like John Ryan said, if you're still here, you stuck it through, I really appreciate you being here with me. It really shows your heart on this particular matter that we're going to discuss today. Um, so I hope that you glean information you might not have heard before. So let me go ahead and transition. Okay, Victor, are you able to see that?
I do see it, and I will admit them as they come in, so that pop-up should go away.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I was trying to
No, no
figure
worries.
that out on my own. All right, so just a little bit about myself. I am going into my 18th year um, as an orchestra director at Howard W. Blake here in Tampa. And when I was asked to speak on this subject, it's very, very new for me by way of just speaking on it. And so it really took a lot of thought because I've never been put in the situation to actually communicate uh, this subject matter, but I think it's very important, not just because of the current climate that we're in, but just because of our culture in general. So I, in no way, deem myself as an expert. I'm just going to present to you from my experience, and hopefully we can continue to learn from each other. Um, my program, before we dive into this, as of last year, averages about 70 to 72 students. Like I said, we are a magnet, so my numbers aren't as large. And out of that, I have, from this last year, 24 minority students. So just about 33% of my program is consistent of minorities, majority Black African Americans. And so when I was presented with this idea, I wanted to uh, come up with the creative title. Um, and I immediately thought about the color of our instruments as a string family. And so that's where I gathered mahogany harmony. And so we're really going to try to dive into uh, creative ways in which we could support our students of color, particularly through string education. By the way, I play the most amazing instrument, the viola. Just wanted to put that out there. Okay, so waiting for my. So John Ryan is going to provide you with some information via a handout that I provided with all of the links and resources that I've used for this presentation, along with my email, as you can see there on the screen. So please don't make this the last time that we meet. Reach back out and let's keep this conversation going. So we're going to talk about the orchestral culture from three perspectives: student perspective, the parent perspective, and the teacher perspective. I had the awesome opportunity over the last month, or a few weeks or so, to have some Zoom conferences because I really wanted to get others' insight on this subject matter. So I was able to contact a couple of alumni to my program, as well as a current rather parent that has students in our orchestra program, and some fellow colleagues that I see have joined us for this presentation. So I just want to really thank them for all of their work. It really takes a village, and I could not have done this without them. So thank you. Um, Through my findings, there's been a common theme with regards to classical music in general. And that question that keeps popping up is uh, racism in classical music, and what does that look like? Um, a couple of days ago, I was walking around the house playing music on my phone, and I asked my son if he enjoyed the piece of music that I was playing. He said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and I told him, this was composed by a black composer, and I was so shocked at his response in saying, "What? I didn't know black people were composers. I thought only white people did that." And for me to hear him say that, for him to have that come out of his heart, was very striking to me and telling to this reoccurring theme. Is classical music, is embedded in, is there racism exists in it? So let's continue on with that. Some more thoughts. All right. So we're starting with the student perspective. And so when you think of these questions, when you look at these questions, I want you to think of the student's response. In particular, our students that are of color. What do you want to be when you grow up? What kind of assumptions arise for minorities? Of course, there's an awareness of jazz and R&B. If they want to continue on into music, that's no problem. But classical music, people often think, who's in the audience? Who's on the stage? Not us, as in color, students of color, people of color. So why include us? And a colleague of mine, Antoine Corey, made this quote. I've noticed that when you get to a certain level of music, in music, for some reason, minorities don't see it as a career choice anymore. And so there's a, like I said, there's an awareness. There needs to be an effort to redefine music, as my alumni to Blake, Cameron Williams, his quote, "We must redefine music as music that is accessible to all." And so we're going to try to come up with some ideas to not only make it accessible to all, but to try to really change the mindset of students of color, of the black culture, as it relates to classical music. Now, parent perspective. This is actually a parent of mine. Her name is Taisha Lafayette, and this is her son, James. And she has 3 boys. There's James on cello, there's Josh on bass, and there's also Jeremiah on viola, the best instrument in the world, by the way. What's interesting about her perspective is that she grew up in a household full of music. And as you may be aware of, most students of color, in particular the black community, also grow up in a world of music, even at the very least through the church. What's interesting about her information is that although her family was very musical, classical music was never part of the platform. So she grew to love classical music herself, to the extent that she wanted to learn how to play the string bass. That's one instrument that always drew her attention. And her motive was to have her children also play the bass. Well, she got close with at least one of them. But one of the things that she struggles with, and has struggled with, was criticism from her own family, from her own people, so to speak. The stereotype, if you will, is to say, "Hey, what are your boys involved with? Oh, he's tall, he must be in basketball. He's kind of stocky, he must be involved with football." But her response to, "Oh no, they're involved with classical music," really has caused some backlash within her own family. And this is a quote from her: "To love classical music is not being white." That's part of the criticism that she has received. "Oh, you have your children involved in that white music, that white thing." What does that even mean? I'm not being white. I'm intelligent. Our people are intelligent. That's what I'm being. So why are you trying to stamp and block us? And you're one of us. Again, she's referring to her own family. We are capable of so much more than sports and hip hop. those are great. Those are wonderful genres, activities for our Black population, youth to be involved in, but we are capable of so much more. One other thing that she spoke of was the lack of accessibility. I really appreciate Manny's perspective on Title I school and mentorship. Her older two sons grew up in a predominantly white area of Tampa, North Tampa. And so the elementary school that they started in actually had a string program. But then they later moved to the east side of Tampa, primarily minority area, and there was no string program in that area on the elementary level. In fact, Hillsborough County has eliminated all elementary programs except for certain areas that can support that endeavor, which is kind of unfair, to say the least. Another interesting point of discussion was we talked about the lack of established track of matriculation from youth all the way through college. So I often think about our historically Black colleges and universities. I myself wanted to apply to an HBCU when graduating from high school, but I knew I wanted to stay into music. But there are no, as far as I know, and please communicate this with me, that's why we're in this together. I'm not aware of any string emphasis, programs with a string emphasis where you can get a degree in string education for our historically Black colleges and universities. Why is that significant? Because I think so, because there's a lack of modelship, a lack of indoctrinating this form of our expression. And if we do not avail our youth to at least have the option of matriculating into historically Black college where the atmosphere is rich, then we're really doing a disservice, in my opinion. She also spoke of the importance of really, again, changing that narrative and influencing our minority parents, really changing the mindset of our parents and seeing and being exposed enough to even consider their child in orchestra. It's much like our students that have never been on a college campus. They won't strive for it unless they have that experience, or at least being exposed to it. One way that I've tried to combat that is a parent orchestra. As some of you may be familiar or maybe have created this in your program. A couple of years ago, a senior project for my orchestra was the seniors were to teach their parents their very own instrument. And so I actually carved out a after-school rehearsal for the parents to actually come in. There was a curriculum set up by my student council lead team, and we taught them, hot cross buns, simple. It was like a wheel class for orchestra, much like a Suzuki type of approach. And the parents were just amazed at the effort that it taken, the discipline that it took to just learn, a simple song. And of course, we debuted their performance on our end of the year concert. So imagine, not only with our seniors, my dream is to maybe start that idea earlier in the career, bringing the parents alongside with the child to value what it really means and the importance and the change that can happen in their child's life, in particular with string orchestra. Manny also pointed out, I didn't even think about this, that strings are very accessible to any age group with a variance of sizes. So there's a really grand opportunity that we can use to tap into our youth from the very beginning in changing that narrative.
I was driving in my hometown in Indianapolis.
Victor, is that coming out okay?
Perfect.
Cool.
And I was stopped by the police, and they shined the light in the back of the car and saw the cello sitting in there, and asked me, where'd you get that thing and all that stuff, and I said it's mine, and they didn't believe me, and they were going to arrest me for stealing it, and they told me, well, it was a big joke to them, like, oh yeah, that's yours. And they told me, okay, well, play it. And so I actually had to pull the cello out. I stopped in this alley in Indianapolis. I had to pull the cello out and play for them. And, and I played a little Bach, and they were like, they were like patting me on the back like it was the funniest thing. Oh, look at that, you can actually play. And it was like this big joke to them. Black folk don't listen to classical music is something I've heard since the first day I listened to classical music.
I would say that I myself grew up dancing ballet, so I definitely listen to classical music. And as you can tell from looking at me, I am definitely Black.
Personally, I listen to classical music because it doesn't distract me when I'm trying to get work done. If I put on gospel, it's a wrap.
I think that we typically gravitate toward music that has a lot more soul to it.
We want something that our body can move to and like thump along with. And classical music is just, it's just kind of there. It's kind of nice. It's like study music, but you're just not finna be in your car chilling, listening to a classical track of anything.
It's closed-minded not to listen to other types of music. That's insane to me.
I think the barrier sometimes when we say classical, we're really saying European, because that's who we think of in terms of classical music. But I often think of classical music like Sun Ra or Phil Karan and the masters who are classical.
Classical music, to me, is more about technicality than musicality. And it's more about like the theory of music and writing notes down and, old white men in gray wigs just sitting in a woodshed getting ink and writing notes and like, this will be the greatest measure of music ever.
Classical music composers, can I name some? Bach, I don't know his full name.
Mozart, Beethoven.
Bach.
Bach is a composer.
Everybody knows like when you hear those like the melodies, you don't know what they're called though. You're just like, da 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 da. I don't even know what that's called. Beethoven's fifth? I don't know, seventh? Well, you don't know either, see?
Duke Ellington, Sentimental Mute, that's classical music.
George Clinton, Prince.
Contemporary ones, there's Adolphus Hailstork, there's just recently passed away, there's a great composer named Coleridge Taylor Perkinson.
Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley.
Nicki Minaj, Beyonce.
Bob Marley, KRS-One, Eric B. and Rakim, Nas.
Renee Baker is a fine local composer. There are a fair number of Black composers.
So the reason why I perform classical music, a major reason is to showcase that in the 21st century, Black people are doing this, and it's not something that's meant for a particular group. We can still see ourselves on the stage performing, whether it's conducting, singing, playing an instrument. So my mission of doing this, pursuing classical music, is to showcase that you don't have to be a rapper, which is great. You don't have to be a football player, that's great too. But you don't have to do what media, society states that you have to.
And the day that thou art seeking gives such rapture as the darkness, gives such rapture as the darkness.
Black people definitely do listen to and create classical music, and when we do it, it's way fresher than anything else.
this ensemble, it's not the music they'll be performing that's unusual, it's the orchestra itself. Europe's first to be made up entirely of black and minority ethnic players. The aim? To encourage people from underrepresented backgrounds to see this as a possible career path. The ideas come from acclaimed double bass player Chichi Nwanoku.
Music itself does not discriminate. It's what goes on around it sometimes that can cause those blockages, those barriers. But we need to just make those barriers invisible because music's for everybody. It's a universal language.
One factor thought to be responsible for the low number of black and minority players is a lack of classical music in some children's cultural backgrounds, and for some less well-off families, there's the cost of learning an instrument. The only thing that's not to blame, a lack of talent. This might be an art form that's primarily about sound, but the orchestra knows the power of this kind of visual in changing a perception that's built up over hundreds of years that classical music is, for the most part, for people from a middle-class white background. Adam Winter from Chineke's double bass section plays in other orchestras, including the Philharmonia. His school and his family encouraged him to become a musician. He wants others to follow.
There's just so many black and ethnic minority people succeeding in all other forms of music that it seems silly not to try and harness some of the talent and, you know, get it into the orchestras.
This project is about more than correcting an orchestral imbalance. Margaret Cookhorn, a soloist at this year's BBC Proms, wants audiences to change too.
We want to be able to reach to minorities, to those people who would never step into a concert hall. We want them to hear us and just to hear Western classical music, to hear us playing as an ensemble.
The orchestra's first performance will be at London's Queen Elizabeth Hall on Sunday. As well as entertaining, the players hoped their music could also represent the sound of change. Lizo Mazimba, BBC News.
So as you can tell, there is a ton of perspectives out there when it comes to people of color's involvement and love of classical music. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. What happened to our history? When I say that, not only the history of classical music, but American history, I could even say that as well, as it relates to the contributions of people of color and minorities as well. Was that by design? I mean, think about it. Most of us are familiar with like the popular, intro to musicology books, and as stated here, and I totally agree, there was nearly to almost no mention of any minority's contribution, and it's really indoctrinated in our minds that classical music, was the dominant of that genre of our history in music. So one could also maybe think about the timing and when most of these musicological discourses were born, and they were born in our times of racist segregation and things of that nature. So that may have been a reason for that lack of knowledge as well, in particular in our growing youth of minorities. So one thing that I do want to point out is yet a contributor to classical music. There, especially around this time of her music being found, has been a significant resurgence of Black composers, such as you see here, Florence Price. What's interesting about her story is that how her music was discovered. There was a large amount of her works that were completely lost. And it's funny that a couple actually purchased a home of hers that she used to own as her summer home. And when they were renovating the home, they actually found her manuscripts. And so what a miracle and blessing that is. And like I said, that spawned the urge to try to dig deeper into the history of American history, of classical music, that has really been off the scene. Of course, she's really cited as one of the first African American classical composers, and she's a woman on top of that. So that's pretty significant. Most of you are familiar with Rachel Barton Pine. I had the awesome opportunity to meet her. She did a clinic at my school in collaboration with our Performing Arts Center, and just phenomenal person. And she has done a lot with coming alongside with bringing this part of our history back to the surface. And I want you to just take a look at these dates. I mean, we're talking about 1700s. And this poster here that you see, you can purchase it. I do have it displayed in my classroom. Again, we're going back to the exposure, at least seeing this and starting to dive deeper into this part of our history, I think is very significant for our youth. And here's just a little bit about what Rachel Barton Pine does within our communities.
Some of the world's finest classical music might have been lost forever were it not for a woman who has spent nearly 2 decades restoring it to prominence. Adriana Diaz on the quest to find and catalog pieces written by some long-forgotten Black composers.
Ready, go. At Brooklyn's Ryder Elementary School, students in the Harmony program got a front row seat to world-class violinist Rachel Barton Pine. She's playing music by composers like Ignatius Sancho, a self-taught British slave, and Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who was once the envy of Mozart.
This music, a lot of it hasn't been published. A lot of it was published but is long out of print due to historic discrimination.
The classical music of more than 350 Black composers spanning 4 centuries has resurfaced thanks to Pine's determined research.
Our primary motivation behind doing this work is to inspire young African American students that classical music is part of their history and that they're an important part of classical music's future.
And it seems to be working.
Who did you think classical music was for?
Old people.
And now do you feel like classical music is for you?
Yes.
Pine's initiative, Music by Black Composers, has created a music book and even a coloring book. Inspiration composer Jessie Montgomery would have welcomed when she was younger.
Knowing about these performers and composers probably would have eliminated the question in my head. Am I odd for being Black and interested in classical music?
It's a question already answered by these young violinists.
I want to be a composer so I can share my feeling with the world.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that.
Tchaikovsky doesn't expect his violin concerto to only be played by Russians. We're all supposed to play all the good music because that's how we learn about each other.
And orchestrate harmony. Adriana Diaz, CBS News, Brooklyn, New York.
I really appreciate her heart in this matter. And let's dig deep into, I go to the last portion of my presentation, and that's the teacher's perspective, our perspective. So we've talked about the student's perspective, parent perspective, and now teacher perspective. Some of the questions I want you to think about is your program in general. What's the focus? What's your vision of the program? Is it to build a program that embraces each other as a community, no matter the demographics of your classroom? Another question to think about is, how do I sincerely take notice with my students of color without being offensive? And I think one of the advantages that we have as educators is that we can build relationships with our students. So if we approach this idea with a sincerity, I think that will come through. because I think it's a discussion that needs to be had. Is your program accessible to all? What barriers are there that are in place? Students of color come into the scene at a disadvantage, primarily with regards to lack of resources, lack of funding, um, not necessarily unstable home situations, but there's support there, but there's still limitations as to what the kids' full potential could be. So some of the things that I want you to uh, kind of think about practically is, how do I build those relationships with my students? Now, of course, we build relationships with all of our students because we teach all of our students. But I think we can be creative, again, with that mindset of really tapping into, come alongside our students of color, just for the sake that it is, in some cases, a rarity, at least, particularly in the South, I should say, that it is a rarity, although I do see it becoming more and more diverse. I've had students in my past that I've had to really mentor. I've had to really, along with other teachers and staff on campus, to really embrace, in particular, this minority student who went through a myriad of challenges from being homeless. But yet, I believe that the cello in particular was really his lifeline, and I wanted to harness that. And now I'm glad to say that he's got a scholarship and he's doing quite well. But it really does take a village. So some things to think about within our student population that we serve. Other things to think about is like knowledge. We've talked about the lack of knowledge, the lack of our history. So at the very least, what you could do is to dive into that history. And we as educators are good at that. We want to know the answers. We want to know the background. But we also should want to share that with all of our students. And one practical way we'll talk on that for a moment, but we're also going to talk about ways to actually plan civic activities within the community, and also provide awareness of opportunities for them to be successful. So one of the ways, as we all know, is that we can create diversity in our programming. And so there are some things that I want you to think about when approaching this idea. When you decide to program a specific traditional repertoire, I want to first ask yourself, like, why are you doing this? Is it to engage your ensemble, the wider community, or maybe to create new audiences? Feel free to talk to people, talk to your, ask them what you might want to see in a concert or in a program. Listening is key to that. One other thing is, once you've become familiar with the particular tradition of music that you want to introduce in your program, the process of actually choosing the repertoire. And so that could be reaching out to other colleagues of, your other minority colleagues that can help come alongside you to make that approach that much more approachable, if you will. Another thing that I thought was interesting is in approaching discussions with members of your ensemble, or in this case, our students, be aware that those that are in vulnerable positions may feel awkward or even targeted because they are accustomed to tucking themselves in to fit the dominant culture. So you always want to just, again, build that relationship with your students. Try to avoid tokenism. We're going to just make this program diverse just one time and this one-time event only, just to meet a quota. You want to make it a sincere habit and communicate with your students, and particularly your students of color, and be, really transparent with them. And I think that's really a good step in that direction of really embracing culture within our literature. Because as you can tell, the literature is there. We just need to tap into it. One other way that we could do is, like I said, is plan civic opportunities for our students to actually give back to the community. One of the things that I think is lacking, well, let me explain what this is first. This is Giving Back, Richard Meyer's initiative of outreach within the community. I saw him present on this, and man, I was like on fire. My kids have to do this. And so this is a photo of what we've done over the years. Every year, we choose 2 schools that are underserved. And this is especially significant for my students to experience because we go out to these schools, we perform for them. We have this really neat piece that we play. What's cool about the Giving Back website, and that's on the list of sources, is that it gives you detail by detail of how to really create that opportunity for your program to go out into the community. But one problem that I've come across is really there's a lack of follow-up. Like we make this huge impact into these children's lives, and quite frankly, they make an impact on our lives too. But there's a lack of connection when we leave the room. And so that's one thing that I'm struggling with. And again, I'm going to try to do better at looking at surrounding organizations, either through youth orchestras or grant writing. My dream would be to create programs where the resources are there. I can follow up. Hey, you want to play a string instrument? Go to this website, sign up for it. We'll give you the instrument. We'll give you the private lessons. We'll give you everything you need to have to be successful, because you never know what interest would be sparked as a result of it. In some communities, this already exists. Unfortunately, in my community, it doesn't yet. Here are some resources that I want to bring to your attention. Of course, most of us are familiar with Thinx. Is a phenomenal platform for reaching out to the community and embracing our students, our minority students. There's a listing here of some fellowships that was provided from another alumni, Christian Abreu. He was so kind to provide this list from his website. Again, that's listed on the items list, that the handout that I'm providing to you. One organization that I came across was the Black Classical Music Educators. It's a way of really networking with private teachers in the area that you can tap into. Now, the initiative is to make it nationwide, but right now, from what I could tell, most of them are like in the California Northeast area. I'm going to sign up myself to try to get that culture started here in my area. One really cool website that I found is called composerdiversity.com. It's a way for you to really filter certain demographics. Like, for instance, I want a piece that's from a female Hispanic composer of string orchestra. That's a really great tool and a database that you can go to try to continue to extract those unknown pieces in your program. We're all familiar with El Sistema, what an amazing national alliance that is to reaching out to our minorities from the beginning stages. Last but not least, I want to just provide you yet another visual of composers, a snapshot of excerpt, if you will, of composers and musicians, some of you that may be familiar with. And this quote here really struck me, being able to see people who have experienced things you have or have the same kinds of challenges you've had allows you to have a richer imagination for yourself. That's one thing that I lacked, was a model of my same culture that I could look up to. And I came to a point where I had to say to myself, well, let me be a model for someone else. And so thank God for internet, because this right here like brought tears to my eyes, because I'm now seeing that we are out there. And like I said, one tool, a tangible tool, would be to really try to get involved with that Thinx Foundation, in particular attending their Thinx conference that they hold. post-COVID, of course. I'm really looking forward to attending that session myself. Just really trying to create a national awareness because we as a people have so much to offer. We have offered so much to America, in particular with classical music. So there you have it.
All right, thank you very much for sharing that, Jason. It's really nice to see people who are not normally represented in our field. And it's just a little personal story. I had the opportunity to conduct an honor orchestra in Maryland, and one of their teachers approached me and said, I have some students who are really excited to meet you. And I'm thinking, they don't even know who I am. But she said, they happen to be Filipino and you're Filipino, and so they're just really excited to see someone that looks like them on the podium. And that's something up until that point I never really considered. I just wanted to do my thing and make music. But I mean, as someone in this unique position, I just thought it was really neat that she shared that with me.
Absolutely. And one thing that my colleague Antoine Corey pointed out, he teaches at a school, a private institution, affluent demographic, and he brought out an interesting point of view. He himself teaches a class with majority white population and maybe a couple black here or there, but he pointed out the notion of when he tried to, for some students, if they grow up in a certain vein of they only know what they know. So ironically, for our students of color, some of them, they may have blinders in their eyes and they may not get the struggle, so to speak, because that's all they know. So that's one of the points that I made before. Be careful to assume, be careful to judge, prejudge, because you just never know where people are coming from. But you're right, in general, for me, it was really, really, really exciting for me to see, to have a model. And as I continue to dig deeper, I hope that effort will continue.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing. A few questions that some people have been asking. I'm just going to read this one verbatim. I teach in a primarily white community. It is a rural school, but in a larger school district where there is more diversity. I used to teach in a larger, more diverse school, but one of the challenges is that the students in my school believe diversity doesn't matter to them. Of course, I disagree with these statements, but I want to encourage them to explore all types of music, even if it isn't necessarily their culture. Do you have any more suggestions on that particular topic?
I think it's just a lack of, that may be a case of lack of exposure to value that within our classical realm. So I wouldn't give up. I would keep pressing on and at the very least use the resources that I've provided to make our students more aware. I think that our current youth population, you can correct me if I'm wrong, are more susceptible to diversity than they have been in the past. Of course, it's different wherever you go, but in that particular case, and it's interesting for me because I'm Black, so it's easier for me to present that to my class, but to my white colleagues in that sense, I guess if you have a hunger for that, just like we do for the traditional canon of Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, bring alongside the other composers and expose it to them. I think that'd create a sense of appreciation.
Oh no, definitely. To segue from what you just said, where did I put it? Oh, I was wondering how to support students who may be one or two Black students in a program that is primarily Asian and white. And I'm a white teacher. What is the right approach with parents specifically?
I think that one way, and I do this, without being blatant about it, I often try to look at the demographics of my students, where they are, and our county provides that to us. Again, not to assume, not to prejudge, but I also poll my students, and you can get creative with the questions that you ask, just to try to become familiar with what life is like at home. And again, I think that over over time, you with that awareness, you'll know how to come alongside your students, your minority students, to provide these opportunities to your class as a whole, but then to give supplement encouragement to those students knowing their background, building that relationship, and in turn, of course, building that relationship with their family home. A lot of times, there's no like zero support. Like I've had to be the parent because I know the value of that. Um, and so you just got to be flexible. But if you know, it's possible. But just knowing, I can't stress enough, really knowing, tapping into the home life, lack of a better word, will really teach you how to better approach our minority students.
Yeah, thank you again. This is coming from one of our pre-service teachers, those that are a college student right now. This person says, I am not yet a teacher, but once I am, I want to program diverse composers from the get-go. I want to focus on normalizing diversity within our repertoire, but I worry that if we don't point out that a composer is a person of color, they may be assumed to be a white or European composer. I don't want to contribute to the erasure of people of color voices in our field, but I also don't want to turn their existence into a novelty or an other. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions?
Right. Again, it's really breaking that mode of what classical music is, and it's vast. You know, I think we put that traditional canon of the greatest, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, you know, to a point of being geniuses, if you will. But even then, the genius, that's a whole nother subject matter. We don't even have the time for it. But every composer has its struggles. Every composer was trained. And so I think if we start from that platform of everyone's like on the same playing field, so to speak, no matter well, of course, there are, like I said, limitations as far as resources and funding and financial situations. But at some point, we are on the same playing field as far as encouraging our students to thrive and to be successful. Just like our minority composers had to push against the grain, most of which went through a myriad of struggles, societally speaking. So they were just as much of a genius as all the rest, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, very good points. Thank you. Here's another one. Though I grew up in a super diverse part of almost Washington, D.C., I now teach in a predominantly white, affluent, private international school. Several times I had one black student in the group a year. I have always tried to build authentic relationships, like always, but always have had a black student alone in class who really felt uncomfortable and awkward about connecting with me or other members of the group. When I showed diverse videos, I think he thought it was spotlighting him, but I was doing it for all students' benefits. Do you have any tips?
Well, that's interesting. One of the parent that I mentioned to Miss Lafayette, her boys they grew up knowing that they were going to be the minority in orchestra. And so for them to be put in an orchestra that is full of minorities would ironically be a shock to them because it's not the norm for them. I would try to tap into why the student's there, what drew them into the classroom. And I think that would be a good starting point. It may have nothing to do, well, you'd just be surprised. Again, building that relationship. And I guess that's a very sensitive matter though, because if he's the only one, he or she's the only one, okay guys, we're gonna learn about Florence Price because she's black. You just gotta have a conversation with that student, let them, and over time, there's going to be walls there. We don't know why the walls are there. But maybe it's due to past experiences. Someone said something to that turned them away or made them feel insecure. So you kind of really tap into that and figure out what that is, and let that student know that, classical music is not a white thing. It's a music thing. And look, you have a rich history in this, so let's do this.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about what's normal to them may not be normal to you. I mean, you know, as a brown person, like I'm surrounded by predominantly white people. But when I actually made a trip to visit family in the Philippines, and I haven't been in years, but I was just surrounded by all other Filipinos. It was really weird for me. I don't know if I really liked it, but that wasn't my norm. My norm was being a minority member as opposed to a majority member. So that's really, thank you for sharing that, because
Right,
that kind
right.
of
And like I said, I grew up in the same kind of way. I grew up in Atlanta, so um, I, I didn't have anyone else to relate to string orchestra wise at that time. It was pre-internet. So I turned it around. It's more of an empowerment for me because I said, hey, black people can do this too, you know? And so I just kind of flipped the script, so to speak. So it wasn't necessarily, okay, even if I am the only one, I'm here. I'm a representation of minorities in this art form.
Yeah, no, yeah, totally with you. So there's a few questions that are along the same line of thought. Um, some of them talk about repertoire, some of them talk about method books, but I think I'm going to try to summarize these items. How would you address problematic music that shows up in student method books, like yeah, like excerpts that have a history of minstrelsy in them?
Right. And one of the resources that I provide speaks to that. We cannot ignore our history, and I love that we can't because it builds knowledge of how we can build a better future. So if we try to avoid it, it's not going to be a part of the solution. We have to actually deal with that. And so to play it, is that supporting it? I would say to a certain extent, yes. So don't play it, but discuss it, figure out its origins, and its perspective in our history, but don't perpetuate it though. Don't give it further influence in society, and that's just in my opinion. So right, I know there's been talks of certain repertoire out there that has racist, connotations to it, and we've got to do our research. That's part of one of the things that I noted with choosing repertoire, is to do the research. If there's something that you're questioning, reach out to your colleagues. Hey, what are your thoughts on this? Reach out to your students. If you have those 2 or 3 students in there, hey, look at what are your thoughts on this? They may not even be thinking about it from that angle, but at least that's a healthy conversation to have.
Yeah, no, definitely. Jason, thank you very much for taking the time to present to us, especially regarding this very meaningful and sensitive and much needed topic. I think that it's great, and then that it's fantastic. So thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.